T, if I understand your question on Twitter correctly, I think it's about the communist poets. So you have a two-part question here. One, is it simply a matter of poets versus the state? Two, or poetry and finding the language to reflect the world as it is being lived versus complacency. So if I understand this question correctly, it's about are we to write poems in order to resist the injustices of the state, the exclusions of hegemonic institutions, or are we to write poems that reflect reality?
Well, let's deal with the first possibility, right? So let's look at the Lechlitner poem. All right. So, close here thine eyes, O state. So she seems to be addressing. I mean, it's pretty obvious she's addressing the state. Close here thine eyes, O state. But is that all there is to say in that poem about the address? I'll read it. The question would be, is she addressing the state, and therefore, as T suggests, she might be just doing this poetic work against the state. Close here thine eyes, O state. These are thy guests who bring to gods with appetites grown great a votive offering. Bring offering, it's rhymed. State, bring great ring. Know that they dare defy the words of law and priest. Better to let the unborn die than starve while others feast. The stricken flesh may be outraged and heal, but mind, pain sharpened, may yet learn to see thee plain, O state. Be blind, accept love's fruit. Be sleek, fat, and lip sealed. Forget that life-avenging pain will speak. Thrust deep the long curette. Whom is she addressing there? Is this a poetic act against the state? Max, what do you think about that? Do you see a political contradiction in the use of this form? I mean, I guess I'll summarize what it might be. Radical content, traditional form. Therefore, if you want to get past that irony, you have to really be ironic about the form. Is she ironic enough? Max went out. So, Lily, what do you think about this situation?
I don't know. I think that there's like that's the creating irony between your content and form is only like one possible dimension we can think about this poem in. So I think like some of the poems in this week do use that strategy, but then there are a lot of poems that are grayer and more in between, like this poem, for example. So I don't know. I think the more interesting question is like, what is the text in front of us actually doing? So like, I read church ballad, but I do read language, like very strong language contrasting with rhymed structure and like more traditional structure. But I don't know that she's going for irony. Like I don't know if that's her intention, like main strategy. But I also don't know that that in and of itself makes this not a good poem or a misguided poem or something like that.
Can we spell out anybody? Can we say in the plainest language what a formal irony is? What do we mean? Max, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah.
Yeah, you're back. Hey, can you start? Let's see if we can formulate a clear way of describing what we mean by the irony of the relationship between form and content. Not necessarily applying it to this poem, but just in general. You want to give it a try?
Sure. Yeah. That there's a tension at work in what we sense, what kind of semantic meaning we derive from the content versus what sort of content we expect from the form. So if you have a church ballad or something, you expect something that's pious or full of praise or something.
You expect content that is pious and full of grace.
Yes, and instead you get in this, for instance, here you get something that's actually about dissent or reform, and not about piety or not about praising things as they are.
Okay, so the formal irony here is that the ballad, the form itself, creates meaning. It signifies. The form itself,
yes.
The choice of the ballad, of the high ballad and the high diction, itself has meaning. That's really one of the great things about poetry, is that the form of the poem can actually lead you initially to make some judgments about its meaning. The use of a Shakespearean sonnet says something. the use of a Petrarchan sonnet, says something in itself, regardless of the content. It says something. Then you get to the content, and if the content does not jive with the literary tradition and the history of the form, then you've got some work to do to try to figure out, and I don't mean irony in the sense of, ha ha, you're like going two places at once. Irony is the way there's an irony if I say moog instead of mug. That's an irony. There's an irony when I say mug, because irony is that space between the sign that gets used and the signified. I mean, so there's an irony in all language. This is, of course, what in the 70s everybody was all excited about in the so-called deconstruction era. All language is ironic. So maybe we mean it not in that ha-ha popular sense of irony, but rather irony as difference. Difference. Irony is the difference. So what Lechlitner is, I think, brilliantly and troublingly doing is she's creating an irony between the topic, which is, you're forcing us to do abortions illegally. We're going to go ahead in defiance because that's what we need to do to live. Go ahead, make our day. Say the women before Roe versus Wade in the Depression, when the church and the state both take positions against what they consider to be life. It's the whole irony of a pro-abortion rights person using the word life, which is supposedly a word from the other side. So she's doing that.